One of the many things to consider when planning an Appalachian Trail thru hike is when to start and where to start. Speaking of starting, March is the beginning, the start of thru hiker season. It is incredibly busy coming out of Amicalola Falls or on top of Springer Mountain, heading northbound on your AT thru hike. Today, I am going to discuss reasons that you may not want to start your thru hike in March. So, if you're planning your AT thru hike and you're thinking about starting in March, here are some things to consider. Hey, welcome back, hikers, and I hope future thru hikers to follow Bigfoot, where knowledge is our niche, to hiking the outdoors. Special video here today. This is actually a video that you guys chose. I did a little bit of a poll on my channel here this last week on 4 different video topics. Which one would you like for me to start with first? Now, I have the intention of doing all of these videos, but what you guys wanted to hear from first is reasons why you should not start your thru hike in March. All right, well, before we get into this, I want to do a very brief disclosure. I am not against starting your thru hike on the Appalachian Trail in March, heading northbound. As a matter of fact, I think for many people it makes sense. I know there's probably hikers right now that are probably sitting at the Amicalola Falls Lodge, starting their thru hike tomorrow, watching this video and thinking, crap, did I make a mistake? All right, so don't freak out. I am going to discuss all the reasons, but for some hikers, there are things that you need to consider before you land on starting in March. Now, when I was thinking about this video and the content, I came up with a list of things that I felt were valid reasons of why you might not want to start your thru hike in March. I did not start my thru hike in March. As a matter of fact, my thru hike, the Appalachian Trail, I started my hike in April 23rd. Although I did go back to Georgia the following year in March and did the entire Georgia section. And so I do have experience hiking in Georgia in March. But what I decided to do, gather information, opinions from some of the folks out there that deal with this stuff every single day. And the folks that came first to mind are the folks right there on the AT that deal with hikers every single March. I had an opportunity to talk to 4 different people. Probably going to see me read off some of my notes just so I can stay organized. The first one, the visitor center at Amicalola Falls. I talked to a gentleman there. His name is Hunter. He's been working at Amicalola Falls Visitor Center for a little bit. And I also talked to a ridge runner that his area is somewhere in that Amicalola Falls area, but he was at the visitor center when I spoke to him. His name is Nick. His trail name is Master Splinter. And then I called Mountain Crossings, which is at Neal's Gap, which is the first major landmark that you hit on the AT heading northbound from Springer. It is also notoriously the place where a lot of people hang it up. Actually, literally, they hang up their boots in a tree and they call it quits. As a matter of fact, about 1 out of every 5 hikers will quit at Mountain Crossings. But I spoke to a gentleman there named Ryan. His trail name is One Speed. He thru hiked the Appalachian Trail in 2015 along with the Long Trail, and then last year he did the PCT. I decided to call Top of Georgia Hostel. I talked to Bob, Sir Pax-a-Lot. So I got a variety of perspective outside of just my own on this subject. Now, after gathering all this information from these 4 experienced dudes and myself, I came up with 5 different reasons why you might want to reconsider starting your thru hike in March. But here's some numbers first, and then we'll get into the reasons. For the hikers out there that start in January, which is about 75 to 100 every year, almost 100% of those hikers quit. I know we're talking about March, but I just thought that was interesting. I mentioned 20% of the hikers quit at Mountain Crossings 1 and 5. 25% of the hikers quit at Dix Creek Gap, which is mile marker 69. And then half quit at Hot Springs, which is mile marker 274.5. Now, the busiest 30-day stretch in Georgia on the trail is mid-March to mid-April. With the weather conditions in March, every year they have to rescue hikers that are stranded or stuck in the mountains of Georgia. Now, at the time of my discussion with the visitor center in Amicalola Falls, which was on Friday, March 8th, there had been 695 hikers that have registered at Amicalola Falls State Park Visitor Center for their thru hike northbound. Now, the last week, they were getting somewhere between 40, maybe even upwards to 50 hikers starting each day. There are a lot more hikers that start their thru hike and don't register. Highly recommended to register so we can get an accurate number on how many folks are actually on the trail and try to manage the trail conditions a little bit. The actual number of hikers is about doubled what checks in through the ATC and at Amicable Falls Visitor Center. Now, for those of you that aren't familiar with ATC, it stands for Appalachian Trail Conservancy. That is the organization that manages the AT. I did reach out to them. My friend Lori Pottiger, we did a video actually together. You might have seen it last February when I did the Winter Forest State Challenge. We did a tour of the ATC, but she was out of the office, unfortunately, and I didn't get a chance to connect with Lori. I would love to have her opinion on this matter as well, but didn't get that opportunity. All right, so that's enough about the numbers. Let's go ahead and go into reason number one, which is weather. Weather in Georgia. I think a lot of hikers think that it's going to be sunshine, rainbows, and butterflies, and that's just not the case. Actually, in Georgia in March, it's their rainy season. They also sometimes have extended weather from winter that's bleeding right into March. Last week, it got down into the single digits. And then if you factor in the wind, it actually fell below zero, negative temperatures. So you need to be prepared for this. So that's the first thing. Weather, it's going to be cold. And I remember actually, I think it was in 2017, maybe it was, 2017. There was a week that it got very, very cold. I mean, I think it was a whole entire week that it was in the single digits. It might even crept below zero in the negatives. A bunch of hikers had to get off the trail because they weren't prepared for those temperatures, which everything filled up really, really quick. And I also heard that some hikers had to be rescued in the Smokies during this stretch in March. Now, temperatures aren't the only thing that you have to worry about with weather in March. It is not uncommon for it to snow in Georgia in March. And then when you get into the Smokies, it intensifies. 2013, there was 4 feet of snow that was dumped in the Smokies. So much that Newfound Gap collapsed. There was a hiker, very experienced. I was told he decided to push through, go into the Smokies. He got stranded. No one could get to him. And unfortunately, he paid the ultimate price and ended up dying, which is something that I think everyone needs to consider. Is it's not just Georgia that you're starting when you're starting so early. You have to think about what weather's going to be like in the Smokies. It is really unpredictable. As a matter of fact, you really aren't clear of possible weather conditions in the Smokies until the end of May. Now, I'm not saying that you need to start on like June 1st because you wouldn't have time to be able to get through the entire AT. It's just not uncommon for it to snow and have winter conditions in the Smokies really late. So starting a through hike in March, you got to worry about the temperatures. You got to worry about the possibility of snow. And then rain. Like I said earlier, it is their rainy season in March. Rain and cold conditions are really serious for any thru hiker. In March, when a lot of inexperienced hikers are just starting and learning everything, they don't have a lot of skill sets, and this just adds to that list of things that you need to worry about. Number 2, when weather hits, it shortens the learning curve for inexperienced hikers. So with all of these things going on, first off, hikers are not equipped to handle these kind of conditions. A lot of them are, but many of them are not. So they get into these situations, sometimes survival situations. So I was talking to Bob Serpax a lot. Every single year, both him and Mountain Crossings get calls for support on trying to rescue these hikers. They get stranded, they get stuck, they call 911, and sometimes they ask for their guidance and their help to try to get these hikers to safety. Now, specifically to equipment, a lot of inexperienced hikers don't have the right clothing to handle these conditions. The number one thing that you need to do is stay dry and stay warm. To handle these conditions and do very, very well in cold and wet conditions is wool and fleece. So make sure you do your research, have the right clothing, have the right materials for the worst possible conditions that you can experience. Now, speaking of this learning curve, the next thing is money. A lot of hikers that are out there don't have unlimited funds. They're in between jobs, they're in between schooling, they just got done graduating, they don't have a lot of money. When they end up getting on trail and they're not equipped to handle these conditions, they end up dropping a ton of money at places like Mountain Crossings to get the gear that they need in these conditions. Now, one thing that One Speed, which is the guy that I spoke to at Mountain Crossings, said, you can't buy your way out of this. There was actually a guy that came in just the other day and dropped $1,000 on all kinds of new different gear because he didn't have the right gear to start off with. He only ended up making it one day more. You just can't buy your way out of it. But for many of you out there, you don't have the money to do this anyways. So what ends up happening, you buy all this gear, and even if it works and you are able to stay on trail, a lot of times folks have to get off trail because they ran out of money and they can't afford to keep on hiking. So I'll just say this again. When and where you start your thru hike, make sure that you do your research and you are prepared for the absolute worst possible conditions so that you don't land into the worst possible outcomes of those conditions. Moving on to my third reason. If you're starting your thru hike in early thru hiking season, March or earlier, you have to bring more gear. Or the gear that you bring is going to be heavier because you need to have the right gear to handle the conditions that you might experience. Now, stating the obvious here, you're bringing more gear, heavier gear, your pack weight is going to go up, which means you're going to hike less miles. You're going to spend more money because you're on the trail longer. You are spending more money on this gear that you have to upgrade to. Reason number 4, the trail is overcrowded. I mentioned earlier that Hunter from Amicalola Falls State Park Visitor Center said that 690 folks have registered so far this year. Half of those are probably in the first 7 or 8 days of March because they're getting 40 to 50 a day. Double that, and that's probably close to a more accurate number of hikers, probably somewhere around 14 to 1,500 hikers that are on the trail right now. Now, I spoke to One Speed at Mountain Crossings about this overcrowding thing, and he looked at it as hiking through a city. He said it's very common for that Hawk Mountain Shelter, which is the first major shelter on the AT, to have 50 to 60 hikers stay in there in March. If your intention to thru hike the Appalachian Trail is to seek solitude, then this is probably a bit of a problem starting in March in Georgia. Now, finding solitude in March isn't impossible. To do this, if you want to stay at a place that no one's staying at, you're going to have to find the stealth campsite. That probably means that you're going to have to end your hike early for the day, or you're going to have to hike more miles to find this spot. Now, with overcrowding of hikers, this also poses a major problem for the trail itself, the conditions of the trail. When I spoke to Hunter, he went a little bit deeper with this. There are so many hikers. You have so many hikers out there. A lot of them aren't digging the proper cat holes. Proper cat hole should be 6 to 8 inches deep and 4 to 6 inches wide. A lot of hikers out there aren't even digging. They're just pooping in the woods and they're leaving it right there. Remember, it's rainy season. The rain washes that away, and where do you think that goes? It goes into your nearest water source. Not just to mention that, but you have people peeing everywhere. So the combination of the pee and the feces in the rainy season and all this overcrowding gives the higher risk of very unsanitary waters in these areas. Now, Hunter recommended that you have 2 different ways to be able to purify your water. First, your filter. He recommends a Sawyer squeeze. Second, that you bring something to help purify that after you filter it, like Aquamira or some sort of tablet. The more people that we have on the trail, the worse that it gets. I strongly empower all of you to be trail advocates. When you see people that aren't following proper trail etiquette, I did a video on trail etiquette, and I'll link it above here if you haven't seen it yet. You see something, say something. The behavior of these very few individuals never change, and sometimes they encourage others to do the same. When you see something, say something. My 5th and final reason, due to the overcrowding, you just have a greater chance of no vacancy where you would like to stay, whether it's in town or at a hostel during this busy season, especially during the month of March. Now, speaking with Bob Serpax-a-lot on his hostel, Top of Georgia, every single day by noon, they fill up in the month of March. Plan ahead, but not days ahead. Sometimes Bob would get calls from people that were at Neal's Gap, which is mile marker like 32 or something, trying to book their stay at Dix Creek Gap for a week later, when there's a lot of things that can happen in a week. What Bob recommends is call the night before or the morning of. Typically, if you call in the AM or the PM the night before, you'll be able to get a spot reserved at his hostel. So that wraps up my 5 reasons, or 5 things to consider before you are set to start your thru hike in March. But I have some advice. All the guys I talked to, we ended our conversation with me asking them what advice do you have for thru hikers? For thru hikers that might want to start in March or other times of the year, or just advice in general. First piece of advice, which was from Master Splinter, that ridge runner in Georgia. He says flip-flop. Flip-flop is highly encouraged, and I know it's something that the ATC highly encourages. Starting somewhere like Harper's Ferry and heading southbound, and then you can flip around and then go back to Harper's Ferry and head northbound, or even going southbound. Second piece of advice, and this one is from Sir Pax-a-Lot. To avoid most of the severe weather conditions that you're going to see in Georgia, try to plan starting your thru hike no earlier than March 21st. So March 21st is the first official day of spring, and typically most of the severe weather is past in Georgia at that point. Now you still have to worry about the Smokies, but by the time you get up in the Smokies, you are probably sitting somewhere in April, and again, the chances and likelihood are less. You can get severe weather conditions in the Smokies, as I said earlier, as late May. One Speed had a couple of pieces of advice. First, and I think this is fantastic, know your self attributes to help in your decision on your start date. Now, if you know that you're going to have a much slower pace and you're going to be on trail for 7 months, then yeah, maybe you do need to start in March, and that's okay. But make sure that you are prepared. Knowing your self attributes is going to really help make many decisions for you when you're planning your thru hike, especially like when you need to start. The second thing that One Speed said is make sure that you set achievable goals for yourself to strive for. I think that's really important, and that's something that drove me every single day. I had some sort of goal. Maybe it was a goal of how many miles I wanted to get in today. Maybe it was a goal of how much water that I wanted to drink to make sure that I'm staying hydrated. Maybe it was a certain mileage of where I wanted to be at noon. I think you need to have some sort of goals, and it helps keep things real, and it tricks yourself, your mind a little bit, or else things start to become like Groundhog Day. It's the same thing day after day after day, and this just changes things up a little bit. It does some good things for the mind. Now, this next piece of advice, every single person I spoke to gave this piece of advice, and this is one of the number one things that I tell everyone: dial in your gear and get out on the trail and hike in a variety of conditions. If you have the ability to get out there on the trail when you know the conditions are going to be really wet all weekend, what a great way to not just test that all of your gear works, but to get you the experience of using this gear in those conditions. But also, what I think is extremely important is to get experience so you know what to expect. This is the mental side of things. What Bob Sir Pax-a-Lot's recommended is book a plane ticket and fly into Atlanta. The airport is so big, you can get really great deals on tickets, and then arrange some transportation to get up to Springer Mountain and do a section hike in Georgia. My own opinion here, I can't think of a better section hike to get ready for an AT thru hike than doing Springer Mountain to Neal Gap. I think that is a perfect way to get accustomed to what life is going to be on the trail. Now, contrary to this video being about reasons why you should not start your thru hike in March, Master Splinter, that ridge runner, actually recommended to start your thru hike in March for most people. Again, if it makes sense. He thinks from a timing standpoint, most folks are going to take 6 months to do their thru hike, and for them to be able to get to Katahdin safely before you get really bad conditions up there, which is mid-October and on, you're going to need to start earlier in the year, and you don't want to be pressed for time. Now, one thing that Hunter said, a positive thing about hiking in March in Georgia, is typically bears aren't active at that time. So there is obviously positives and a lot more than just that to also hiking in March. And lastly, Bob Sir Pax-a-Lot gave this piece of advice, and I think this is spot on because I saw this a lot on the trail. Don't allow pride to camouflage good decision making. So many times we are so prideful and hard-headed because we told everyone we're going to thru hike the AT, and then the last thing that we want to do is come home with our tail between our legs. So instead, we push, we make poor choices, poor decisions, and that can lead to some of these stories I said earlier about people in survival situations, or just overdoing it and getting injured. So don't let pride get in the way of making good, solid decisions. Now I'm going to wrap up the content of this video with the 4 most common reasons why people quit their thru hike, their northbound thru hike at Neal's Gap at Mountain Crossings. I got this from One Speed. One Speed has been working at Mountain Crossings. I think this is 3rd or maybe 4th season at Mountain Crossings. So he talks and sees a lot of hikers. And I said earlier about 1 in 5 hikers will quit here. Number 1 reason why hikers quit at Neal's Gap is it's not what they thought it would be. The second reason, weather. They just can't take the cold, the rain, the conditions. The third reason, no views. Remember what I said about March being a very rainy season, lots of overcast in Georgia? And I actually added number 4 in here. We didn't get to number 4, but I feel like, in my opinion, that the 4th reason is some sort of injury or just body discomfort in general. They're just not happy with how they're feeling, they're in pain, and they can't go on. Well, that wraps up the content of this video. If you found this video to be of any help or you learned something new, consider giving me a thumbs up. One thing that you'll see that's new to my videos, actually it's below, and I think you can only see it on like phones or tablet devices. Below the video, that is, you're going to see my merch store. A lot of requests to get the Hiker Evolution shirt that we came up with on the channel. And the problem is we are just not able to launch the campaign for that shirt as often as the requests that come in. Well, now you can buy any apparel of this design on my merch store. You can just click on that piece below and it'll take you to the merch store. You can also click the link, I'll put it in the show notes. One thing that we did is we made the classic tee, which is the most popular option, a little bit more affordable for everyone. It's under 20 bucks now, it's $19.99. For those of you that are not subscribed or are new to the channel, do it. Do it now. It doesn't cost you anything. What's the big deal? Subscribe to the channel. If you hit that little bell notification there, it's going to tell you when I drop content. Keep us connected. Thanks everyone for staying engaged, staying tuned in, for all the love, and I'll see you guys next week.